Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The sun in Kyrenia had a way of touching everything with honesty. It bathed the rusted rooftops and whispered through dry cassava fields, shedding light on poverty that dressed itself in normalcy. In the middle of that sun-washed honesty lived Daniel Kalu, a boy whose dreams were much too large for the skin of his reality. Daniel wasn't born into a legacy or even a reputation. His name carried no weight in the corridors of power, and his mother's name, Ebel, was only spoken in hushed tones, part respect, part pity. Their home was a single-room mud structure nestled at the edge of the village, where chickens walked in and out like they paid rent. The walls leaned from years of stubborn endurance, and the zinc roof held on by sheer will and worn-out nails. Daniel's bed was a mat that knew his weight too well, and his pillow was nothing more than a folded wrapper that still smelled faintly of soap and palm oil. He would wake every morning before the roosters, wash his face with cold water fetched from the communal tap, and walk barefoot to the mechanic shop, where he earned just enough to feed his mother and keep the fire in their kitchen flickering. Each morning, as he stepped into the world, he carried two things, the scent of engine oil and a belief that somehow, he would not die in obscurity. Daniel's life would have remained a cycle of work, hunger, and quiet resilience had he not met her, Amara Chittabim. She was the kind of girl that made the market feel like a stage. Her laughter, when it rang out between stalls of ripe bananas and dusty yams, made grown men pause. She was neither too tall nor too short, but she carried herself like the daughter of a queen, even though her reality told a different tale. Her father, Mr. Chittabim, was a shadow of a man who reeked of cheap gin and broken promises. Her mother, long buried under a mango tree near the river, had left Amara with the kind of strength that only orphans understand. She sold plantains and bitter leaf with the energy of someone selling treasure, and every transaction was punctuated with a joke, a smile, or a proverb. Daniel noticed her before he even realized he had feelings. It began with helping her carry heavy baskets to her stall and grew into lingering conversations about dreams that felt too foolish to share with anyone else. She told him she wanted to be a teacher, to wear heels that clicked on tiled floors, and live in a house that didn't leak when it rained. He, in turn, told her about owning a workshop where he wouldn't just fix cars, but design his own. They found solace in each other, the kind that didn't need to be explained, only understood. Their courtship was a slow burn, the kind that simmered through seasons, gathering flavor like soup left overnight. Daniel would spend his last coins buying roasted corn just to have an excuse to visit Amara in the evenings. She, in return, saved the ripest mangoes for him, hiding them behind her stall until he passed by. They never kissed under the stars or held hands in the open, but their love was carved into the silences they shared and the way their eyes searched for each other in a crowded market. When Daniel lost a week's pay because a customer vanished without settling a bill, Amara brought him food wrapped in old newspaper and said, "You will own the whole street one day." And when Amara was once slapped by her father in public for refusing to give him her day's earnings, Daniel followed her home and waited outside until the lights went off. Their love was their secret sanctuary, not because they wanted it hidden, but because the world had already taken too much from them, and this was the one thing they could protect. It was under the mango tree behind Daniel's mother's house, where they first dreamt of leaving the village, that he asked her to marry him. No ring, no kneeling, just a trembling voice and two hands holding each other like anchors. Their wedding was the simplest chapter in their story, yet it glowed with the kind of purity that wealth could never mimic. The village square played host to a gathering of borrowed joy, shares lent from the church, food contributed by women who loved Ebel for her quiet strength, and clothes stitched from leftover fabric at the tailor's shop. Daniel wore a shirt 2 sizes too large, and Amara wore a borrowed lace gown, that still smelled of another bride's perfume. But they smiled like royalty. As the sun dipped below the palm trees, and a gentle breeze stirred the red dust, they made their vows, not just to love and cherish, but to build, to rise, to become something more than what life had handed them. Abel wept silently, clutching a Bible too worn to close properly. Her lips moved with scripture. Though thy beginning was small, yet thy latter end should greatly increase. Job 8 verse 7. That day, they were not two poor souls getting married. They were architects of a future still unborn. No one clapped louder than the children, and no one danced harder than the old women. But Daniel and Amara didn't notice any of that. They were already building something sacred, brick by invisible brick. In their minds, the factory existed, the home was bought, and their children ran through hallways they could not yet afford. Love, raw and unfiltered, was their only capital, and it was enough. Daniel's journey into business began not with a grand plan, but with a desperate attempt to stretch what little he had into something more. He started by fixing bicycles behind his mother's house, while Amara took up tailoring lessons with the help of a generous neighbor who had no children of her own. What they lacked in finance, they made up for in grit. Every bolt tightened by Daniel was done with the care of a surgeon. Every seam Amara stitched was measured like her future depended on it, because it did. With the few naira they managed to save after months of skipping meals and wearing worn-out clothes, Daniel leased a broken-down kiosk on a narrow corner of Ikpenu Street. It was little more than 4 wooden poles and a zinc sheet for a roof, but he painted the name Denham Mechanics on a small signboard with the pride of a man announcing his arrival to the world. Passers-by laughed at the name. Some called it foolish. What empire comes from grease and grease-stained hands? They joked. But Daniel didn't flinch. He kept his eyes down and his head high, remembering how Joseph was sold into slavery before he ever sat in Pharaoh's palace. What began as patching tires and changing oil grew into full engine repairs as more people started to notice the boy who never overcharged, who worked late into the night and always returned the smallest change, even when no one asked for it. Trust began to grow where money couldn't. Amara was not just a wife in Daniel's life. She was his anchor, his strategist, and his silent partner in every choice. While Daniel labored with his hands, she labored with her mind, learning from books and from anyone willing to teach her how businesses worked, taxes, receipts, pricing, and simple accounting. She kept detailed records in a second-hand notebook she guarded like treasure. When the kiosk brought in more clients than Daniel could handle alone, it was Amara who suggested hiring a boy to help. When the first small engine came in for repairs, she negotiated the price, stood her ground, and walked away with a deal that made their week's profit double. The walls of their one-room house became cluttered with receipts, price lists, sketches of engine parts, and prayers. Every night before sleep, Daniel and Amara would sit on their bamboo mat and whisper plans into the dark, plans to own land, expand the shop, maybe even import parts directly. The stars outside their small window blinked like distant promises waiting to be claimed. They were tired, often hungry, but they had direction. Each day brought a new problem, but also a new solution. One evening, after a week of no business, Daniel came home with a broken generator someone had discarded by the roadside. He fixed it overnight, sold it the next morning, and used the money to buy a used engine jack. That jack allowed him to take on more jobs. That job led to a partnership. That partnership birthed a contract. They were not running anymore. They were starting to move forward. As Denham Mechanics evolved into Denham Company, their small beginnings were never forgotten, but carefully folded into their growth. Their first big break came when a logistics company gave Daniel a monthly contract to service their delivery bikes. Amara had insisted they pitch for the contract, even when Daniel believed they were too small to be noticed. But her courage was a torch, and Daniel followed the light. The deal changed their lives. With consistent income, they paid off lingering debts, bought second-hand office equipment, and hired 2 more apprentices. The shop expanded into the adjacent plot, and Amara transformed the section into a small parts store, creating another income stream. By this time, Amara was no longer just a wife of a mechanic. She had grown into a respected businesswoman who vendors greeted with two hands and staff called Madame Amara with genuine respect. Meanwhile, Daniel never let the rise intoxicate him. He still washed his own hands in the same bucket, still kept his grease-stained overalls, and still gave discounts to old customers who had believed in him when all he had was his name. Slowly, the local bank began to notice their operation. A loan offer came, and for the first time, they saw real figures in their account. Not much, but enough to see tomorrow clearly. With the funds, Daniel bought industrial machines, and Amara renovated the space to meet safety standards. Dan & Company now had form, rhythm, and reputation. They were no longer struggling to breathe. They were learning how to run. With the growth of the business came a new life, one both sweet and strange to their senses. They moved into a modest but clean bungalow not far from the main road, the kind with 2 bedrooms, a small veranda, and a vegetable garden in the back. The neighborhood children would often peek through the windows, curious about the couple that once walked barefoot but now owned a car. Daniel drove a used blue sedan with an uneven bumper, but to him it felt like a royal chariot. Amara filled the house with color and warmth. She planted flowers near the front steps, painted the walls herself, and started keeping a ledger of family expenses with the same precision she used in the business. In the midst of all this, they welcomed their first child, a girl they named Elena, meaning light has come. Her birth added a new purpose to their hustle. With each child that followed, Tari and Junior, their goals matured. It was no longer just about survival or comfort, but about legacy. Dan & Company had grown into more than a business. It was their proof that something beautiful could rise from the ashes of lack. Their life was no longer hand to mouth, but hand to heaven. Every day they lived felt like an answered prayer, yet they never stopped praying. Daniel often reminded Amara of Ecclesiastes 11 verse 6, "In the morning sow thy seed, and in the evening withhold not thine hand, for thou knowest not which shall prosper." And so they kept sowing, working, building, trusting. But neither of them knew that even empires, when left unguarded, can be invaded not by war or fire, but by silence, neglect, and a slow forgetting of the very things that made them rise. Malik had always been part of the background. Like the sound of leaves rustling or the gate creaking when opened, his presence was something unnoticed until it was needed. He was hired during the company's second major expansion, when security at the residence became necessary. Back then, he was quiet, respectful, never one to overstep boundaries. He kept to his corner by the gatehouse, a small iron bed, a transistor radio, and a flask that kept his tea warm through long nights. Daniel had been one to give him the job after seeing him sweep the premises of another compound with such careful detail it reminded him of the discipline his father once taught him. "He's the kind of man who understands structure," Daniel had said casually to Amara one day while they watched from the living room window. For years, Malik did his work with consistency, unbothered by heat, unshaken by rain. He knew the names of the children. He greeted the house staff politely, and he kept a strict record of who came in and out of the compound. But like a seed buried in fertile soil, his intentions took root slowly. It wasn't until Daniel began traveling more frequently, leaving for long stretches to oversee operations in Awari, Port Harcourt, and even as far as Accra, that Malik started to look directly at Amara. And she, lonely and starved of emotional connection, began to look back. The first real conversation between them wasn't dramatic. It was a rainy evening. The wind had knocked down a few flower pots, and the younger housemaids had run off giggling under their wrappers, unwilling to step back into the storm. Amara, frustrated by their indifference, stepped out in her slippers to arrange the fallen clay pots herself. Malik, from his station, saw her bending to pick them up and walked over with an umbrella. "Let me help you, madam," he said softly, holding the umbrella with one hand and lifting a pot with the other. She hesitated at first, surprised that he had left his post, but accepted the help. That was the first seed. After that day, the small encounters multiplied. He opened the gate faster when she returned from errands. He fetched her newspaper when the wind blew it across the lawn. When she sat alone on the veranda with a glass of Zobo, he would sometimes sweep near enough to exchange small talk, and when she laughed at something he said, a dry, forgotten laugh that startled even her. He knew he had found a weakness in the wall. Amara didn't realize when the conversations turned from brief greetings to full dialogues. She found herself telling him things, small things at first, how much she missed Daniel, how hard it was managing the children alone, how the house sometimes felt too big and too cold. Malik listened, always with a bowed head and an expression that never judged. He never interrupted her, never offered advice unless asked. That silence made room for her heart to grow comfortable. It wasn't long before comfort turned into complicity. One night, Daniel was stuck in Calabar due to a flight cancellation, and the compound's generator failed. The rest of the staff had retired early, but Amara sat in the parlor staring at the flickering candle. The silence was so thick it echoed. Then a knock at the door startled her. It was Malik, holding a lantern and a small rechargeable fan. "I thought you might need this," he said. She let him in, hesitated to take it, then asked him to sit. 1 hour became 2. Talk turned into laughter. The laughter turned into something else. That night, the line was crossed. The next morning, Amara couldn't look herself in the mirror without feeling the weight of 100 stones. But shame is strange. It only hurts when you still believe you're wrong. The more Daniel stayed away, the more Malik made himself available. When the water tank overflowed, he fixed it. When the window blinds broke, he replaced them. When the kids needed help carrying heavy bags from the car, he was there. Always there. Slowly, he became more than a gatekeeper. He became a presence inside the house, a voice that made suggestions, a shadow that lingered too long. And Amara, she stopped resisting. What had started as comfort became dependence. What was once secret became routine. Daniel never suspected a thing. His trust in his wife was the kind built from years of shared pain, and his faith in the people under his roof was still anchored in the loyalty of their beginnings. Even when the children began to notice that Malik seemed more relaxed around their mother than a gatekeeper should be, Daniel dismissed their concerns with a wave. "He's like family," he once said over breakfast, sipping coffee while Amara sat across from him with eyes too tired to meet his. The truth is, Daniel had begun to lose touch, not just with Amara, but with the rhythm of his own home. He had grown so accustomed to running the company that he forgot how to run the home. The distance created silence, and in that silence, Malik took root. The staff began to whisper, and the children began to wonder, but nobody said anything out loud. Not until one night when Daniel traveled to Abuja for a business summit. He had a mild headache and chest pain the evening he arrived. He called Amara, and she answered sleepily, barely attentive. "Just take Panadol and sleep," she had said. He never woke up. By morning, he was found lifeless on the hotel bed, his phone clutched in his hand, a Bible verse he had highlighted still open on the screen. "Set thine house in order, for thou shalt die and not live." Isaiah 38 verse 1. The call came at dawn. Amara screamed so loudly the housemaids rushed in, Malik among them. For the first time in months, he touched her hand in public. And she did not pull away. The man who built the empire was gone, and the man who guarded the gate was already inside. Amara wore her grief like a cloak of smoke, thick, suffocating, and always shifting. In the weeks following Daniel's burial, the compound was heavy with a silence so dense it felt like the house itself was mourning. His picture, enlarged and framed in gold, stood on a glass console table in the living room, adorned with white roses that were replaced every 3 days. People came and went with condolences, offering more words than comfort, more prayers than practical support. but the weight of widowhood had no instruction manual. She found herself moving through the house like a stranger, unsure whether to sit in her usual corner of the sofa or change where she placed her slippers at night. The air still carried Daniel's cologne. His suits hung in the wardrobe untouched. His Bible remained on the bedside table, still open to the last passage he had read aloud before his last trip. Yet amidst the mourning, Malik remained close, too close. At first it seemed innocent. He brought her food when she forgot to eat, offered to drive the children to school when the driver resigned abruptly, and made administrative calls to the company when she couldn't muster the strength to speak. The house staff, bound by their own silence and confusion, tiptoed around him. His steps, once cautious, grew more confident. Amara, overwhelmed by the sudden inheritance of an empire she had never expected to manage alone, leaned into him more than she realized. The board of directors at Dan & Co. were initially respectful, giving her space to mourn, holding meetings without her, and only sending monthly updates by email. But business could not wait forever. Soon, decisions had to be made, contracts reviewed, suppliers paid, employees reassigned. Amara, unfamiliar with the machinery of company management at such scale, found herself attending meetings she didn't understand, nodding through reports filled with jargon that felt like a different language. The management team, loyal to Daniel's legacy, tried to be patient. They proposed assigning a temporary advisor to help her transition. But Malik, now appearing in finely tailored shirts instead of his gatekeeper's uniform, began whispering doubt into her ears. He told her the board was conspiring to steal the company, that they had never accepted her, that Daniel had warned him once about their arrogance. The lies were subtle, coated in just enough truth to seem plausible. Amara, vulnerable and grasping for direction, began to see the board not as allies, but as threats. She started firing people, one after another, those who had worked with Daniel from the early days, those who had earned his trust with years of loyalty. Malik took over their roles under the title Operations Coordinator, a label he invented for himself. And the more people he displaced, the more powerful he became. He began to make decisions without consulting anyone, using Amara's signature to authorize deals that drained the company's reserves. He even suggested leasing one of the factory wings to an external logistics firm, pocketing kickbacks without her knowledge. All the while, Amara sat in the corner office with drawn curtains, battling waves of guilt, sorrow, and misplaced trust, unaware that the empire built from love was cracking from within. The children saw it all, but for a while they said nothing. Elena, now 21 and in her final year of law school, began to sense something deeply unsettling. Malik was no longer simply present, he was omnipresent. He answered questions meant for their mother, reprimanded staff openly, and once even corrected Junior's behavior during a family dinner. What was more shocking was Zamara's passivity. She no longer challenged him, no longer spoke against his suggestions. She deferred to him like a subordinate, not a widow. Elena approached her privately one evening, hoping to awaken her to the danger. "Mama," she said carefully, "we need to talk about Uncle Malik." But Amara flinched at the words as though she had been slapped. "Don't speak of things you don't understand," she snapped. "That man has done more for us in the last few months than your father did in a year." The words hung in the air like poison, stinging more because they came from a place of hurt rather than truth. Tari, 15 and observant beyond his years, began documenting suspicious changes in the company finances. He noticed trucks leaving the factory at odd hours, paperwork that didn't match shipment records, and missing inventory. Junior, only 11, heard whispers among the staff, how Malik had been seen entering Amara's bedroom late at night, how the staff no longer knew who they worked for. But when he brought it up at the breakfast table, Elena warned him to keep quiet. "We need proof, not accusations," she said, already planning her next visit home from school. They were Daniel's children, and somewhere deep within them, his spirit stirred, urging them not to stay silent. Amara's transformation was almost tragic in its pace. She had once been the woman who managed logistics, who kept ledgers and negotiated deals when Denham was just a spare parts business with one broken chair. But now, surrounded by opulence and unspoken betrayal, she walked the halls like someone haunted. Malik filled the silence with noise, constant updates, meetings, new plans that often left her more confused than confident. When the company accountant resigned suddenly, citing irregular transactions, Malik dismissed it as envy. When long-standing suppliers began requesting meetings with the board rather than her, Malik intercepted the messages. The children began to feel as though the company was no longer theirs. The family name on the gate meant little when decisions were made behind closed doors by a man who was never meant to rise beyond the fence. Even the neighborhood began to notice. Rumors spread like wild harmattan fire. Church friends stopped visiting. Invitations to corporate events grew sparse. People began to talk about the gatekeeper who now drove a Lexus, wore gold wristwatches, and was often seen giving instructions in a voice that used to only say, "Yes, sir." And in the midst of it all, Amara still held on to the illusion that she was in control. Her grief had calcified into denial, and her heart, wounded and yearning, continued to mistake loyalty for love. Malik, ever patient, ever watching, knew that as long as her confusion remained intact, so did his power. But what he underestimated, what he could never fully understand, was the blood of Daniel that flowed in the veins of his children. And soon, that blood would remember what it meant to fight. Elena returned home earlier than anyone expected. Her visit was sudden, quiet, and strategic. She arrived on a Thursday evening, carrying not just her suitcase, but a mind sharpened by law lectures and instincts carved from watching her father's footsteps. From the moment she stepped into the compound, she noticed changes that didn't sit well with her. The security guard she remembered had been replaced by a new face who barely made eye contact. The garden, once trimmed and alive with the color of Amara's flowers, looked abandoned, overgrown, and dusty. Malik's car, a sleek black Lexus, was parked where Daniel's used to be. Inside the house, the energy had shifted. Her mother seemed distant, eyes dull, a smile forced and quick to vanish. Malik now sat at the dining table during meals. He spoke boldly, without invitation, and his words carried the arrogance of someone convinced he had one. But Elena saw through it. Her training had taught her how to listen between lines, to observe without announcing judgment. She noticed the subtle changes in staff behavior, how they hesitated before speaking, how they watched Malik before responding to even the simplest of questions. It was no longer a house of order, but a house under quiet occupation. And her father's legacy? It was unraveling like a fabric pulled thread by thread, unseen until it was almost bare. That night, as the others slept, she took out her notebook and began documenting everything she had seen. She didn't yet have a plan, but she had determination, a fire that had always burned behind her calm. The next morning, Elena visited the office unannounced. The front desk receptionist, a woman who had once danced at Elena's 6th birthday, looked startled but welcomed her with an embrace. But that warmth turned to confusion when Elena asked to see the latest board meeting minutes. "Malik keeps all those now," she said hesitantly. "We haven't had a formal board meeting in almost 3 months. Elena masked her shock with a soft smile, but her stomach churned. She wandered through the offices, each room revealing signs of decay, disorganized files, disgruntled staff, and departments operating on guesswork rather than direction. She finally sat with Mr. Tund, a quiet senior accountant who had served the company since its early days. In the privacy of a locked office, Tund removed a file from a drawer and placed it gently in front of her. It contained payment records, contracts, and transfer receipts, many of them bearing Malik's forged signatures or manipulated figures. Some assets had been sold to shell companies that linked back to untraceable bank accounts. Others had been leased out without formal board approval. "He's getting this company from the inside," Tunde said in a whisper. "We tried to warn Madam, but she wouldn't hear of it." She thinks anyone who questions Malik is an enemy. Elena's heart ached, not just from the betrayal, but from the realization that her mother had gone deeper into the fog than she feared. She took photos of the documents, thanked Tund, and left with heavy steps. Her first call was to Tari. Her second was to a family friend who had once served as Daniel's legal advisor. By evening, the wheels of a quiet investigation had begun turning. Tari responded like a soldier given orders. He had been keeping records himself, screen captures of digital logs, discrepancies in factory inventory, and whispers from staff too afraid to speak directly. He and Junior had long suspected something was wrong, but with no authority, they had felt helpless, caged in their own home. Now, with Elena leading the charge, there was direction. Junior, though young, played his part. He recorded a conversation between Malik and a logistics contractor in which Malik demanded an under-the-table commission to approve a shipment deal. Every piece of information added another block to the case they were building. Elena filed a formal complaint with the company registrar, backed by documented evidence of fraud, mismanagement, and abuse of office. Then she called for an emergency shareholders meeting, a move that stunned Malik, who had grown too comfortable under Amara's blind protection. The meeting was scheduled for a Friday. By Thursday night, Malik had tried to intimidate Tund, threatened staff who had spoken up, and even confronted Amara, accusing her children of conspiracy. But Amara, caught in a whirlwind of shame and confusion, said nothing. That silence, once Malik's shield, now became his undoing. On the morning of the meeting, Malik entered the boardroom with swagger. He wore a crisp white shirt, dark sunglasses, and the smirk of a man convinced of his invincibility. But as he walked in, he was met by cold faces and file folders laid open like tombstones. Elena stood at the head of the table, dressed in black, her voice calm as stone. "You have stolen from the company my father built," she said. "You have manipulated our mother, destroyed careers, and shamed our name. Today, it ends." The showdown was as brutal as it was dignified. Elena presented her case with precision, each document, each transaction, each timestamp. Witnesses spoke, from Tund to the driver, who had once delivered cash envelopes to unregistered addresses. Malik tried to interrupt, but his voice was drowned in the avalanche of truth. When he accused Elena of vendetta, she replied, "This is not revenge. It is accountability." At that moment, Amara walked into the boardroom. She looked smaller than she had ever appeared, wearing no makeup, no jewelry, just a plain dress and swollen eyes. She asked for the floor and was granted it. Her voice trembled, but her words were sharp. "I allowed grief to blind me," she said. "I allowed loneliness to open the door to deception. I failed as a wife and, more painfully, as a mother. But I will not fail as a woman who still has breath to make things right." Her confession stunned the room. Malik froze. The woman he had manipulated, leaned on, and corrupted had finally broken free. By noon, a resolution was passed to remove him from all positions, pending legal proceedings. As he was escorted out, Malik turned to Elena, then to Amara, but neither of them looked at him. He was no longer a threat. He was a chapter closed. Outside the office, the sun shone brightly, and for the first time in months, the name Denham Company felt clean again. The children had done what their father could not foresee, but what his blood had prepared them for. They had restored the balance, not just of business, but of honor. And though the wounds were fresh, the healing had begun. The weeks that followed Malik's exit moved like waves, strong at first, crashing loudly in the ears of the community, and then slowly ebbing into the quieter rhythm of restoration. Word spread across Karenya and beyond, but the children did not revel in victory. Elena spent her days combing through what Malik had left behind, broken systems, unpaid salaries, and bruised relationships. She approached the task not as a daughter seeking to avenge her father, but as a woman determined to rebuild with the same honesty Daniel had poured into every brick. Contracts had to be restructured, the books reconciled, and staff morale restored. She called back some of the old hands who had left in frustration, personally apologized to those who were wronged, and ensured that every voice was heard in the healing process. Terry, ever practical, turned his focus toward operations. He reorganized the warehouse, replaced outdated machinery, and even brought in external auditors to assess what was salvageable. The damage was real, but not beyond repair. Junior, now more confident, assisted in modernizing the company's communication systems and began learning the basics of logistics management. Together, they worked from morning till night, not because they were forced to, but because they understood that legacies were not inherited by blood alone. They had to be fought for, nurtured, and guarded. Their father had built an empire from dust and diligence. It was now their turn to give it new breath. There were moments when it felt overwhelming, but in those moments, they reminded each other of Daniel's favorite verse, "Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not." While the children focused on the company, Amara took a different kind of journey, one that required no ledgers, signatures, or board meetings. Her journey was internal, and it demanded a courage she had once lost. For the first time in years, she woke without noise, without Malik's voice shaping her thoughts, without the illusion of control that had slowly bound her like chains. She sat in the backyard most mornings, in the same woven chair Daniel used to mend every time its leg wobbled. She spoke less, prayed more. She began journaling, scribbles of memory, regret, and gratitude, sometimes all in one sentence. The children noticed a shift in her. She no longer walked with false strength. She allowed herself to be quiet without disappearing. There were days she wept while holding Daniel's clothes, especially his factory overalls stained with years of grease and hope. She never tried to defend her choices to her children, never justified what had happened. She simply lived with the truth. And in that quiet truth, she began to find peace. Her relationship with Elena grew strongest. They spent many evenings together, not talking about the company or even about Malik, but about the past, how Daniel proposed, how they sold tomatoes during their first year of marriage, how the mango tree behind their old house still stood. He was not perfect, Amara once said softly, but he deserved better than what I gave him at the end. Elena didn't respond. She simply reached out and held her mother's hand. That gesture said more than words ever could. As the months turned into a year, Dan Company returned to strength, not with fanfare, but with consistency. Elena was officially named CEO during a brief but dignified ceremony attended by senior staff, loyal clients, and the board. She declined interviews and media profiles, refusing to turn her family's pain into public spectacle. Instead, she instituted changes that focused on integrity, transparent salary structures, mental health days for employees, mentorship programs for interns, and community outreach initiatives that Daniel would have approved of. Terry became director of operations, while Junior, now 16, took an internship role within the IT department with plans to pursue a degree in industrial engineering. The name Dan no longer sounded like just a brand. It had returned to its root, Daniel and Amara, not just as founders, but as symbols of rising, falling, and rising again. One afternoon, Elena led a walkthrough of the factory floor and paused before a small wooden plaque recently installed near the entrance. It read, "Built with sweat, saved with courage." She ran her fingers over the words and closed her eyes for a moment, whispering a prayer not for success, but for strength to sustain. The staff clapped as she continued walking, but what they didn't see was the tears she quickly wiped away, one born not from sorrow, but from overwhelming reverence for the journey it took to stand there. Back at the family estate, changes were subtle but meaningful. The house was quieter, the laughter more grounded, and the spaces once filled with tension now held conversations rich in grace. Malik's presence had been thoroughly erased, not out of bitterness, but because the home needed fresh breath. His quarters were converted into a reading room filled with Daniel's books and journals. A new gate was installed at the compound, not just stronger, but symbolic. The children designed it themselves, iron bars intertwined with brass, shaped to resemble branches and roots. At the center was an emblem, a rising sun forged from copper, bearing three initials, E.T. J. Amara watched the new gate being mounted from her bedroom window. She didn't speak, but her heart swelled. Later that evening, she walked down the pathway alone and stood before it. Her eyes traced every line, every curve. When Elena joined her moments later, Amara said quietly, "This gate feels like a door that finally closed and one that has just opened." Elena nodded, and together they stood in silence, two women shaped by storms, bonded by blood and forgiveness. The past was not erased, but it no longer dictated their tomorrows. The children had taken back what was theirs, not with bitterness, but wisdom. And now, under the same sun that had once watched Daniel and Amara dream beneath a mango tree, a new chapter had begun, not just for the family, but for the legacy of what it meant to build, fall, and rise again. My dear listener, if you followed this story to the end, then your heart has surely traveled through love, struggle, betrayal, loss, and restoration. This story isn't just for entertainment. It's a mirror, a reminder, a warning, and also a deep encouragement. Life, as you've heard, is like a house built brick by brick. Some days the sun will shine on your labor, and other days the rain may fall without mercy. But what matters most is who you build with, why you build, and how you guard what has been built. Let this story remind you. Don't be too busy chasing success that you forget the hearts beating quietly behind the walls you worked so hard to build. Pay attention to silence. It is often in the quiet that danger enters. Grief, loneliness, and neglect can open doors that no stranger should ever walk through. Be careful who you let whisper into your seasons of weakness, because not everyone who offers you comfort means you well. If you're building something with your spouse, partner, family, or even a friend, build it with vision, but protect it with discernment. Don't just build with hands. Build with heart. Build with prayers. Build with accountability. And when you leave anything in someone's care, make sure they value it enough to guard it like their own soul. And to those who are sons and daughters, never forget that you are the gatekeepers of your family's legacy. If something begins to fall apart, don't stay silent. Rise. Speak. Stand. Because silence allows rot to grow, but truth, when spoken in love, can redeem even what was almost lost. Now, wherever you are, whether you're listening from your kitchen, your car, your room, or from far across oceans, bow your heart, if not your head, as we pray. We thank you for this moment, for the story, for the message, for the truth wrapped in fiction. We thank you for every ear that listened, every heart that felt, and every spirit that received. Lord, we lift up every listener to you, asking that you teach us not only how to build, but how to protect what we build. Give us wisdom like Solomon to lead our homes and lives with discernment. Give us hearts like Daniel Kalu, hearts full of vision, diligence, and unwavering faith. Give us strength like Elena to speak up even when it's difficult, and to rise when it would be easier to remain quiet. Lord, heal every heart that has been betrayed. Restore every relationship that's hanging by a thread. Guide every man and woman trying to rebuild something they thought was already broken. Uproot every malic spirit from our lives, those who sneak in under our pain and seek to destroy what we've labored for. Open our eyes, Lord. Let us not be blind in seasons where we need to see the most. And to those grieving, confused, or lonely right now, wrap them in your peace. Remind them that even after loss, there is life. Even after failure, there is hope. Give us the grace to forgive, the courage to confront, and the humility to learn. Let every home listening become a garden of healing and not a battleground of silence. Let legacies rise again. Let broken gates be rebuilt stronger than before. Let our hands be clean, our hearts be pure, and our eyes be focused. Father, we speak new beginnings over every listener. New oil, new strength, new wisdom. Let their amen shake heaven, and let testimonies rise from the ashes of this tale. In the name above every other name, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.